Here is a puzzle that has troubled careful readers of the Bible for a very long time. In Genesis, the earth is filled with giants, the Nephilim, and God sends a flood that destroys every living thing that is not on the ark. Everything outside that ship dies. And then many centuries later, the spies of Israel come back from the promised land white with fear, and they say a single terrifying sentence. There we saw the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers. The giants are back. And the question is simple, and it is sharp. If the flood killed them all, where did the giants of Goliath's world come from? This is not a trick question invented by skeptics. It is a genuine tension inside the text itself, and the Bible raises it without flinching. Giants before the flood, a flood that drowns the world, and giants again afterward, all the way down to a young shepherd standing in a valley facing a champion 9 feet tall. Today we are going to trace this thread honestly from Genesis to that valley. We are going to look at the answers people give, weigh which ones the text supports and which ones it does not. And we are going to end up somewhere more interesting than where we started. Let us begin before the flood, with the verse everything hangs on. There were giants in the earth in those days, Genesis says, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. The Hebrew word translated giants there is Nephilim. And notice something almost everyone reads past. The verse itself says giants were in the earth in those days, and also after that. The Bible flags the after that right there in the same breath. It is not hiding the problem. It is naming it. Then comes the flood, and the language could not be stronger. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beast, and of every creeping thing and every man. All in whose nostrils was the breath of life of all that was in the dry land died. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. Every man, if the Nephilim were men who breathed on the dry land, then the Nephilim died. The text leaves no giant standing outside that ark. So the problem is now fully formed, and we cannot wriggle out of it. Genesis says every living thing outside the ark died, and the same Bible later is full of giants. The Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim, the Zamzumim, Og of Bashan, whose iron bed was over 13 feet long, and at last Goliath of Gath. 8 people came off that ark. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives. None of them is described as a giant. So how does the bloodline of the giants cross the flood? There are 3 main answers. Let us take them one at a time. And before we go on, we have to be honest that even the first giants are disputed because it turns on one contested phrase. The sons of God. There are 2 main readings, and thoughtful believers hold both. On the first, the sons of God were fallen angels, and the Nephilim were their unnatural offspring. That is the reading the book of Enoch takes, and the one many of the early church fathers assumed. On the second, the sons of God were simply the godly line of Seth, and the daughters of men were the corrupt line of Cain. On this view, the sin was not angelic at all. It was the holy line marrying into the wicked line until the whole earth was corrupt. Which reading you take changes what the giants even were. And the plain truth is that Genesis, in its few short verses, does not settle it for us. The first answer is the simplest. The giants after the flood were not supernatural at all. They were just very large, unusually tall human beings. On this reading, the Nephilim before the flood may have been something strange. But the Anakim and Goliath afterward were simply men at the far end of human height. Tall families exist. Conditions that produce great stature exist. Goliath was a giant the way we might call a 7-foot man a giant today. Remarkable, frightening, but fully human. This view has one big strength. It requires nothing miraculous to explain the post-flood giants at all, and for many careful readers, that is enough. But it has a weakness, and the text supplies it. The spies do not say we saw some very tall men. They say something much more specific. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. And in the Hebrew, that phrase which come of the giants uses the word Nephilim again, the very same word from Genesis before the flood. The spies are not just describing height. They are making a claim about lineage. They are saying these are the Nephilim, the same kind of beings from the old world. So whatever the Nephilim were, the Bible itself connects the giants of Canaan back to them by name. That connection pushes us toward the second answer, and it is the one many take from the book of Enoch, which we have looked at before. On this view, the Nephilim were the offspring of fallen angels and human women, genuinely hybrid beings. The flood destroyed that first generation. But then, after the flood, the same kind of transgression happened again. Fallen angels, or their influence, produced a second wave of these beings among the peoples of Canaan. Remember, Genesis said giants were in the earth in those days, and also after that. This view takes and also after that to mean it happened more than once. A second incursion, after the water receded. This answer has real force, because it takes the Nephilim language of the spies seriously. But it also carries a heavy cost, and honesty requires naming it. The Bible never actually describes a second angelic transgression after the flood. Genesis 6 describes the first. Nothing in Scripture narrates fallen angels taking wives again in the days of Abraham or Moses. This view has to assume an event the Bible never records in order to explain beings the Bible does mention. It is a possible reading. It is not a stated one, and that gap should make us cautious about teaching it as fact. Which brings us to the third answer, and it is the quietest, and in many ways the most satisfying. The bloodline crossed the flood through the ark itself, not through Noah, but through his sons' wives. Genesis is careful to tell us that Noah was perfect in his generations. Many scholars read that as a statement about his lineage, that Noah's ancestry was unbroken and pure. But nothing is said about the ancestry of his sons' wives. 3 women came onto that ark whose family lines we know nothing about. And there is a detail that makes this more than a guess. After the flood, the giants do not appear randomly across the earth. They cluster in one region, Canaan. The Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim, Og of Bashan, Goliath of Gath, all of them are found in or around the land of Canaan. And who was Canaan? In Genesis, Canaan is the son of Ham, one of Noah's 3 sons. The giants reappear precisely in the territory named after Ham's descendants. If a trait carried through the flood in one family line, the geography fits Ham's line almost perfectly. Now I want to be careful here because this is exactly the kind of place where people overreach. The Bible does not explicitly say that one of the wives on the ark carried the Nephilim bloodline. It is an inference drawn from the clustering of the giants in Ham's territory and the silence about the wives' ancestry. It is a reasonable inference. It is not a stated fact, so hold it loosely. What the Bible gives us plainly is the pattern. The giants come back, and they come back concentrated in one family's land. The explanation for how is where Scripture grows quiet, and we must be humble. And the Anakim were not the only kind. The Bible keeps a careful catalog of the giant peoples, as though it wanted us to know these were not one isolated legend. There were the Rephaim, a name that becomes almost a general word for the old giants. There were the Emim, whom the Moabites feared. There were the Zamzummim in the land of the Ammonites. Deuteronomy pauses to tell us that all of these were reckoned as Rephaim, a people great and many and tall as the Anakim. Different names, different territories, one recurring description: great, many, tall. The Bible is not whispering about a single freak of nature. It is describing a phenomenon spread across the whole region, and then carefully recording how, nation by nation, it was cleared away. Whatever the mechanism, the giants are unmistakably there, and the Bible names them with care. The most feared were the Anakim, the sons of Anak in the hill country around Hebron. It was they who broke the courage of Israel at the border of the Promised Land. 10 of the 12 spies looked at them and concluded the land could not be taken. Who can stand before the children of Anak? That fear cost that generation 40 years in the wilderness. The giants did not need to lift a weapon. The mere sight of them turned an army back. And then there is Og, the king of Bashan, who gets one of the strangest footnotes in the Bible. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of giants, Deuteronomy says. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of it. 9 cubits, over 13 feet long. The Bible preserves the measurement of his bed the way a museum preserves an artifact, as if to say, we know this sounds impossible, so here is the evidence we kept. And notice that one word in Og's description. He remained of the remnant of the giants. Remnant, a leftover, a last survivor of a dying kind. By the time of Moses, the giants are already fading from the world. They are not a thriving race. They are the scattered remainder of something that is being cleared away. Og is called one of the last of them, which sets up the final giant, the one everyone knows, standing almost alone in a valley, a relic of a vanishing world, daring anyone to face him. And here is a moment of hope tucked inside the fear, easy to miss. Of the 12 spies who saw the Anakim, 10 came back paralyzed. But 2, Joshua and Caleb, came back saying the land could be taken. They saw the very same giants. They simply did not draw the same conclusion. And watch what happens 45 years later. When Israel finally enters the land, it is Caleb, now an old man of 85, who asks for one particular piece of ground. Give me this mountain, he says. The mountain of Hebron, the stronghold of the Anakim, the very place that had terrified the nation. And he drives the giants out. The man who refused to be afraid of them as a young spy is the man who clears them as an old warrior. The giants fall to the one who never believed they were undefeatable. By the time we reach the valley of Elah in the days of King Saul, the giants have nearly vanished. And out of Gath steps the most famous of them all. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. 6 cubits and a span, somewhere between 9 and 10 feet tall by the traditional reading. His coat of mail alone weighed 5,000 shekels of brass. The staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam. He was a walking fortress, and for 40 days he stood and mocked the armies of the living God. And where is Goliath from? Gath. Gath was one of the last places the Anakim were said to survive. When Joshua cleared the giants out of the land, the text says a few remained in 3 Philistine cities, Gaza, Ashdod, and Gath. So Goliath is not an accident. He is a survivor from one of the exact 3 towns the Bible told us the giants lingered in. He is the tail end of the whole story we have been tracing, the last great champion of a bloodline that should have ended in the flood, and somehow did not. And there is a line in the book of Joshua that reads like the closing of an old account. After the long war for the land, the text pauses to summarize. And at that time came Joshua, and cut off the Anakim from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the mountains of Judah. Joshua destroyed them utterly with their cities. And then the sentence that matters. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the children of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod there remained. Read that carefully. The giants are declared finished in Israel, with 3 exceptions, 3 Philistine cities where a remnant lingered. The Bible is quietly loading a gun that will not go off for another generation, when a champion walks out of one of those exact 3 cities into a valley to meet a shepherd. And who does God send against this last giant? Not Saul, the tallest man in Israel, who stood head and shoulders above everyone else, and who, by every human measure, should have been the one to fight. Saul stayed in his tent. God sends a boy, a shepherd too small even to wear the armor they tried to put on him. He takes it off. He goes down to a brook and picks up 5 smooth stones. Everything about the scene is built to make one point unmistakable. This is not a contest of size. And there is a quiet detail people love to ask about. Why 5 stones? If God was going to give the victory, why not one? The Bible does not say, but later in the story we learn something interesting. Goliath was not the only giant of Gath. He had brothers or kinsmen also described as giants who appear in later battles. One had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. 5 stones for a valley that still held more than one giant. Faith does not mean walking in unprepared. David trusted God completely, and he still bent down and filled his pouch. And those kinsmen of Goliath deserve a closer look, because they are the quiet proof that the story does not end with one famous duel. The book of 2 Samuel keeps a short, almost overlooked record of 4 more giants of Gath, killed in later battles by David's mighty men. One was Ishbi-benob, whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass. One was Saph. One was a brother of Goliath, whose spear staff was like a weaver's beam, just like Goliath's own. And one was the man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. These were the last of them. And the text says plainly, these 4 were born to the giant in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. The giants that should not have survived the flood are, one by one, finally cleared from the earth. And the valley of Elah was not the end of the war. It was only its most famous battle. Then comes the sentence that unlocks the whole meaning of the fight. Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield, David says, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This battle is not the end of a monster story. It is the reversal of one. For generations, the giants had made Israel feel like grasshoppers. Now a boy who refuses to measure the enemy by size brings the whole reign of terror down with a single stone. The thing the whole nation feared, he treats as already defeated because he is not looking at its height. He is looking past it. And that is the deeper point buried under this entire puzzle. The giants, whatever they were, represent a power that looks unbeatable. They enter the story as the thing that cannot be overcome. They fill the earth before the flood. They break Israel's nerve at the border. They hold the valley for 40 days. And every time the Bible drives toward the same conclusion. The undefeatable thing is defeated. The flood clears the first generation. Joshua clears the land. A shepherd clears the valley. The giants are always, in the end, the thing that falls. And the New Testament picks up exactly this shape. There is an enemy older and larger than any giant, one that has terrorized the whole human race from near the beginning, death itself. And the pattern of David and Goliath is the pattern the gospel says God repeated on the largest possible scale. The champion no one could defeat is defeated, not by the strong man everyone expected, but by one who came in weakness, and one with what looked like defeat. The stone that felled the last giant is a small picture of a much larger stone, rolled away from a tomb. So what do we carry away from this long, strange trail of giants, stretching from the days before the flood all the way to a single stone in the valley of Elah? 1. The Bible does not hide its hard questions. It raised the giant problem itself, in Genesis, with the words and also after that. A faith that can face its own difficult texts honestly is stronger than one that pretends they are not there. We are allowed to sit with a puzzle we cannot fully solve. 2. Be honest about the difference between what the text says and what we infer. That giants returned after the flood is stated. How they returned is not. The clustering in Canaan is a real clue. It is not a proof. Humility about the gap is not weakness. It is accuracy. 3. Every giant in this book exists to fall. The whole arc, from the flood to the valley of Elah, is teaching one lesson in many forms. The thing that looks unbeatable is not. What towers over you, measured by God, is already a remnant, already fading, already on its way down. Whatever is standing over your own valley today, defying you for its 40 days, remember the boy who would not measure it by its height and the God in whose name he walked toward it. The giants were always going to fall. That was written into the story from the very first verse that mentioned them. And the thing that towers over you was written into the same story, with the same ending. It is loud now. It will not be loud forever.